Edgars, hello, hello. I am making sure I am going and I am live. This is hello, hello. So, good to be with you. It is Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I thought I was going to have to change the time for this at some point. I don't know what's happening, to tell you the truth. So, I'm just sticking with what I'm used to. Yet and still, I am still in this camera view. We will figure it out as we go. Edgar Cayce Life Skills Studies is sometimes his bio, which we're doing today, and sometimes from his readings, trying to bring things into the 21st century. This was all started because of the energies that play out around the 60-year gap around a turn of a century. So 30 years before the turn, 30 years post the turn, hence why we're doing it again. The energies are always usually very similar, so I'm trying to bring what 100 years ago was up to current date. Thank you, Shelley, for coming into the chat. I do say hello to those who come in the chat. And if you don't know, my name is Courtney, host of Stars of the Morning Light, and a full resource platform for people. So, bio. We haven't actually done his bio in a while because we did, I think, 2 or 3 videos on a part of the book that we're reading of his readings back when, which I don't have in front of me. I apologize. But we are back in his bio, and today, what's fascinating about today is, well, you're going to get a little bit of mine and my husband's story, but also by the end of it, I can use what his bio and my bio to really kind of drive home this concept of there is no actual destiny. People, it's such a beautiful word, and people love that concept. Fate, if we want to have words for things, fate would be more of a soul contract aspect. But destiny, people like to use that word to say that everything's determined, right? Everything's already planned out, and there's no such thing as that at all. And so by the end of today, you're going to see and understand how that can play out in life. Played out in Edgar's life, played out in my life with my husband. So we're going to kind of examine that at the end. From even a reading that he did in 1941, or a dream, I should say, of him being in the Akashic. And him learning, well, what if this didn't happen? What would have been the outcome? Same for many people. If this didn't happen, if we didn't make these choices, oh, that would have been the outcome. So by the end of today, going through parts of his bio here, and me comparing mine to his, because it's uncanny for especially those who have been watching this and been participating. Yeah, a lot of similarities. I grew up knowing about Edgar Cayce, but I didn't really dive into it took a deep dive until about 2013. And my husband did a dive himself, not as extensive as me. And it, what I think stopped him was that it was just freaking him out how much my life and Casey's life was very similar. It kind of freaked him out. So, going back to his bio, he's engaged to Gertrude. Okay, he's engaged to Gertrude, but remember he proposed, she accepted, and then he lost his job. So, no grown man, especially back then, would he continued on with the engagement, but it was elongated then because he knew he needed to find a job. He needed to provide in some way, right? So as they're trying to figure out what to do, there was a bookstore, or I guess trading store. imagine at the turn of the century, bookstores were, you know what bookstores were? They were Amazon. That's why Amazon started as a bookstore. I believe I actually, back in the day when, there was the Columbus House Records or whatever, and you could get tapes for a penny, there was actually a bookstore that did that. And that's how I had a lot of my books, because they had a lot of religious material and a lot of books that I kind of did the Columbia House Records things with them. Like, oh, a penny? Sure. And then I'll just, forget to send you a check. Um, what we all did. I believe they were, and this was the late 90s, I believe that is what became Amazon. So back on in the turn of the century, turn of the 19th century, right? So the 20th century, um, bookstores would have had not just books, they would have had lamps, they would have had household items, they would have had, it would have been much more than just books. Wallpaper, lamps, shoes. I mean, it would have had a whole uh, different departments within it. So he started searching out and he heard of what we do know of, J.P. Morgan and Company. I mean, that name is still around. That J.P. Morgan, like, yeah, we know how big that got. And there was a very big department store type situation in Louisville, Kentucky, which was the biggest city in Kentucky at that time, and away from Hopkinsville and Gertrude. But he wanted to work there. And first he mailed him his resume and recommendations and all this stuff, letters, and they declined him. And he then was very persistent, as Edgar always was. I Throughout his bio, we are learning skills that we don't have anymore in the 21st century. He was persistent in everything. Remember when he got to Hopkinsville? The first bookstore turned him down. He went to a few other places, and then he just kept bothering that. He basically just started working at the bookstore, not leaving it until the boss turned to him and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I want to work here." He was very persistent. We don't do that anymore in today's world. When we want something, if we get rejected, we move on, right? Um, he didn't do it that way. He bothered the J.P. Morgan Company for like the entire summer of 1898. The entire summer he just kept sending them stuff. I'm working for it. Like, come on, I'm gonna work for you. And by August 1st, he had to say goodbye to Gertrude and go to Louisville. I see Lori came into the chat. Good to see you, Lori. So he says goodbye to Gertrude. Now they are engaged to be married. He got her a ring, but it was very odd. He got her a ring and then shipped it to, I think it was something like Romania or something, or Italy, to get it sized and put, all in place. I'm thinking, wow, that's a far trusting. that's exceedingly trusting. So I hadn't actually come back yet, I don't think, but by the end of this tale here, it will have. So he goes to Louisville. Louisville is much bigger than Hopkinsville. It's the biggest city in Kentucky at the time. I think Louisville might still be the biggest city in Kentucky. Oh, we love Kentucky, don't we? I know Lori in the chat loves Kentucky. He starts working, and the first night in, he goes to a boarding house that he knew of through people. And that boarding house cost, and this is turn of this 19th century, like, wow. This boarding house, because it was a bigger city, it cost $5 a month to rent a room there. And when I read that, I was like, whoa, that's a lot of money, guys. That's a lot of money at that time. And Edgar didn't know if he was going to be able to afford, like, he paid the $5 for the first month, but he didn't know if he was going to be able to afford living there. So he started work. He was getting paid $5 a month. I think a little bit of commission as well. Yeah, I think it was like maybe $1 a week plus $5 a month. Remember, this was a lot of monthly payments. Like you would have to wait until the end of the month to get paid. So Edgar started working there and then decided he needed to make extra cash. So in this boarding house, there were all sorts of different people. There was a medical student, an artist, a musician, all sorts of people living in a boarding house, right? That's how it goes. And the artist introduced him to the art gallery that sold his stuff. And because of the work at the bookstore in Hopkinsville, when he would have to frame things, because these bookstores sold more than just books, he would have to be the one that framed paintings for people in Hopkinsville. So out of that experience, he started moonlighting, framing artwork at this art gallery. He also, one of the people that he met was, did tickets on the train. So like 1 or 2 nights, he would clip people's tickets on the train for, a one-way or round trip to wherever he was going or wherever they were going. He did that a couple of nights, but that also paid for if he were to go visit Gertrude in Hopkinsville, he could get free passage to back home, which he ended up not really using. But he was making enough money to support himself, doing all these side jobs on top of working at J.P. Morgan. Okay, so he's working at the bookstore. And, guys, Edgar's really good. He's a detailed worker. He's knowledgeable. He shows up. I used to have a boss that would say the word show up and show up with effort. And that was Edgar. So some of his coworkers didn't really like him. Other coworkers came to realize, well, this guy is kind of the boss's pet, but it's because he does know his stuff. Like, we have to ask Edgar, and we've been here longer than, or we've been here longer than him. So Edgar kind of did become like, top dog of the place, still very humble. It was just Edgar did his job, and he was really good, and he cared about what he was selling and what he was doing. So one day, this woman, Margaret, came in. She was from a very well-to-do family. So those in the tobacco industry that ended up being very well-to-do, like Philip Morris, kind of well-to-do, because Kentucky really grew the majority of all tobacco. Tennessee grew some of it as well. Highfalutin families in Louisville. Well, this woman, Margaret, and they didn't really state like which family she was from, right? But she was from one of those. The family definitely did well with dark tobacco. This woman, Margaret, comes in, and they give her Edgar to walk around the store with her. So back when, kind of like how salespeople today might go, can I help you with anything? Back then, it was, especially if you were a potential client of that status, especially that. And they still do this with clients of that status. They would have a salesman walk with you through your entire trip, your entire time there. So they gave Margaret Edgar, right? And Edgar spent the day with her, and she ended up spending hundreds of dollars. Now, this was 1898, you know, wow, hundreds of dollars. Guys, today that would be thousands and thousands of dollars as far as what it's worth, right? What's your rent today? 900 something compared to $5. We're talking that kind of difference. And she's just spending money. Not only did that store, that department store really, end up like solidifying a relationship with that family through Edgar to Margaret, as in a even contract kind of thing, which a lot of that still kind of happens with the more well-to-do. They have contracts with these companies they get all the good stuff first. They get all this, they get all that, right? So he solidified that contract. Just being Edgar, just being knowledgeable and just being, who Edgar is, humble. So it wasn't just that. She was impressed with Edgar for some reason as they're walking around. I was looking at the chat. Hello, everyone. Hi, Jackie. Good to see you. Thank you sorry for that pause. I was making sure things in the chat were going well. She was so impressed with Edgar that she sent an invite to a gathering at her house via the department store, and his boss was elated. And Edgar realized, he said, okay, but what I got on is not going to do. So his boss even said, okay, go to our tailor. It's on us. Like, you're clearly making an impression on this family. We love salesmen that do this. Go for it. So Edgar went, and he was scared again, kind of like when he went to the hill for the first time when Gertrude invited him. So now he's got this other female, Margaret, inviting him to a very well-to-do household for some kind of gathering, dinner, right? He must have had, I don't think it was even so much charisma. It was the authenticity of himself, So he's got this other woman now, Margaret, that's invited him. Margaret and him kind of hit it off. Stick with me, folks. Stick with me. Margaret and him kind of hit it off, and they ended up spending a lot of time together. They found out they were a part of the same Christian movement, social movement. It was called the Christian Endeavor. I will tell you, at the turn of the century, there were many Christian movements that were all for social change of some kind. And towards the end of this flip, more, I would say, mid-century, some fizzled out, some grew strong, and certain things came about because of them. Think of Prohibition. That started with some form of Christian endeavor, right? So they actually participated. Edgar and Margaret did a lot of Christian endeavor services together. They would go to the local jail or prison and read to the men there. They would work alongside with the Salvation Army. They were going together, is the point I'm trying to make. That was very uncommon at that time. But when you're elite status like Margaret, no one's going to question it publicly, right? Because you can really do whatever you want. So Edgar was spending a lot of time with her, and the correspondence that he promised Gertrude back home, the woman he is engaged to, started becoming less and less and less. Less and less and less. And Gertrude kind of got wind, or could just feel, that she had lost Edgar. Gertrude at this time also lost her grandfather and then her grandmother. And then it was becoming very clear to Gertrude that Edgar was very busy doing something else, or he was just not interested anymore. She fell into a horrible depression. She thought she lost Edgar entirely, completely. So, as Gertrude is just kind of wasting away back at home in Hopkinsville, Edgar, even though now he's not making $5 anymore, he's now making $10 a month. He got a raise. His involvement with this family and his involvement then now having more status in the town, he went from $5 to $10 immediately when he met when he met Margaret. He is now making $40 a month. That is good money. But is he putting anything aside for him and Gertrude in the future as his original plans were and the promises he made to her? No. No, he's actually living a really fun life. He's going to Louisville show. I can't even say the word now. He's going to shows. He's going to the theater. He's going here. He's doing this. He's having a good young time of things in the big city. All the while, Gertrude is laying in bed depressed and wasting away physically big time. I'm trying to think because I want to pause here for a moment. Because in his bios, I put in a bit of my backstory. And it's good to see everyone. Thank you for coming. So many of you might not know this. I'm going to talk about myself for a moment because it all is going to coincide. Okay, that's what I do with the bios. I coincide, and like I said at the beginning of this, by the end of this show today, we are going to be talking about this concept of destiny through what happened here with Edgar and 100 years later with my story. So many of the audience, they know I'm married. I've been married now 13 years, right? Post the holidays, it'll be 14 years. When we met, it was pretty fast and furious. I will tell you, my husband was still married to someone else. I know, scandalous. Just hear me out, because it's going to make sense when I compare it to Edgar's story. Hear me out. They were separated. That was a very short-lived marriage for about 1.5 years, and they were separated, but yet living in the same house because she was making plans to move to Texas from Illinois. So they were separated. He lived kind of in the basement. She had the top floor. They were separated. I met him, and I kept saying, no, I don't know if we should do this. I don't know if we should do this. We met basically kind of at the beginning of December, had our first kiss mid-December, and by New Year's, we were talking about getting married. That's how fast and furious it was with him and I. At the same time, though, my career was boosting like Edgar's is. He kept being promoted. I was also being promoted a lot. And Brad was dealing with finalizing divorce and all sorts of stuff. So it actually wasn't a good time for either one of us to be thinking about it. So like I said, by New Year's Eve, we're talking marriage. You know, we just met. Um, the first week of November, or not November, I'm sorry, February. The first week of February. So we had dated for about a month and a half. All in 1 week, I went to Boston for a business trip. Brad's father visited him and stayed with him and his ex-wife in the same house, and he had to explain all this stuff to his father. She was going to be moving the following week to Texas. There was a lot happening. There's a lot of emotions, a lot happening because this was a big business trip. Should I focus just on my career? She hasn't even left for Texas yet. I mean, there's a lot going on. And the night he was supposed to pick me up from the airport, he got into a horrible car accident. Horrible car accident. He should be dead. I had no idea what was going on. I had to regroup at the airport at 10 o'clock at night. I couldn't get a hold of him. I didn't know what was going on. I had to call my parents and be like, I'm sorry it's so late. You got to pick me up from the airport. I wasn't about to pay a taxi. That back then it would have been a taxi. We didn't even have Uber, I don't think. There was a lot happening. And when post that accident happened, we talked and I said, you know, I have a lot going on. You have a lot going on. We should separate for a while. And so we did. And during that separation, I kind of filled a gap with a coworker. I didn't date him. That wasn't the thing. But I was spending a lot of time with that coworker, kind of filling the gap. Some I was consciously aware of, some I wasn't. I was just kind of filling my time. We talked occasionally, but the correspondence kept going less and less. So that would have been February, March, April. I will tell you, by Memorial Day weekend, I went on a camping trip with people, a 6-hour drive there. I drove to meet them. By that night, I went, I really need to get back together with Brad. I think the long drive induced it, you know, in your head, sorting it all out, that I left them the same night and drove all the way back and texted Brad. I said, I'm coming. It's going to take me like 6 hours, but I'm coming. That weekend, we got engaged. So hear me out. Now we're going to go back to Edgar. There's a reason why I'm bringing this all up. And so you guys know, everybody is okay. Brad and I, like I said, we've been married for March will be 14 years. His original wife, she moved to Texas and she ended up being remarried. She is fine. Everybody in the situation is doing just fine. There's reasons why I bring this up, though. And Brad, during our separation, was doing the exact same thing as Gertrude was doing. By the time I showed up again in May, his whole face and body was sunken in, and he wasn't eating. There wasn't even any food in the house. Like, he was just miserable. And I was like, oh my God, you're gonna die. Same as Margaret. So, let's go back to Cayce for a minute. So he's hanging out with Margaret, and I do want to bring this element up. We're going to put the whole relationship marriage thing aside for a moment. While he was hanging out with Margaret, at one of those shows, a hypnotist wanted to hypnotize Edgar, put him under. And Edgar said, hey, you know, others have tried to do this and it doesn't work. And he was like, well, let's try. And he was under. He did not come back to until he woke up like at a desk at work with all of his coworkers around him. It was like 2 days later. I'm going to keep going again. I guess that hypnotist thought it was going to be fun to just give Edgar a whole list of things to do for a couple of days. And Edgar was very under. Edgar was, as we know, he has that gift that he is not really, his body might be present, but he is not present. A few years later, again, maybe 2 or 3 years later, he's actually kind of working with his dad. We're going to get there at the end of the story. And the man who raised him, Leslie, and they are in, I think it's Madisonville, Kentucky, another smaller town. They're selling insurance. And the hotel that they were staying in was quarantined. Like, just a little while after they got there, everybody in that hotel room had to go into quarantine for smallpox for at least 3 days. So everybody's stuck in this hotel. There was a hypnotist there that, to help entertain people, he would do some shows, and as they're sitting and waiting to find out about smallpox and what's going on. And he decided to put Edgar under as well, hypnotist. And he told Edgar to play the piano. And he was really going to try to, make it fun and childlike for the audience, thinking that Edgar would just start pounding on keys like a 3-year-old playing the piano. Edgar sat down to that piano and played the most beautiful piece of music when he has never played anything before. So then the hypnotist sold it as, oh, I must have released a latent, gift that this man has. He can play the piano. He's a savant. Many hypnotists over time period would end up doing that with him. They would say something or tell Edgar, they would put him under and go tell Edgar to do something that there'd be no way that he would know how to do it. And then all of a sudden he's doing it. The reason I bring this element up is he was going to these shows with Margaret. These are the kind of experience, this is the fun life he was having without Gertrude, right? As he was supposed to be working and saving money for a house, for all of it, for their future. I bring this up because there's going to be a lot of people that have the gift of accessing the Akashic, or have the gift of traveling in deep meditative states. And that is what hypnosis is. And I have witnessed, I think I was like 19 or something, and I went to Six Flags Great America with a friend of mine, older friend of mine. And we're in the audience of that hypnotist show, and I had never seen a show like that. And, she's picking the audience members to participate. The guy I'm with, he stood up and like, me, and I was like, yeah, get this one, because I don't want to go anywhere near this. I just want to watch. Like, I don't know what you do, lady. I don't trust you, But so she chose him. The things that she was able to make these people do was terrifying to me. Terrifying. I don't trust hypnotists. I just don't. It is a skill. It's having a power of voice, and it's also cues, and some people are very, very receptible to it. The problem is if you have someone like Edgar that naturally goes into a very deep state at a click of his own finger. Now imagine if somebody is inducing that and then telling you what to do in the meantime. I just don't, and to each their own, with hypnotists, to each their own. I don't trust them. I just don't. It's not appropriate for someone to go into your own mind when you can do your self-hypnotism all the time. I can teach you techniques We'll probably be learning a bit of that on Patreon. I'd rather you hypnotize yourself with hypnosis to lose weight, quit smoking, recover from something. I'd rather you learn how to do yourself than to entrust to someone that you don't know, because I have witnessed too much stuff. And clearly, from that one that he was with Margaret, he spent 2 days not knowing what he did. 2 days. It's just there's safety to things. And I also want to point out, because eventually after Edgar Cayce, we're going to get into some of the others. Rudolf Steiner, all these people, and what societies they would threaten in a lot of ways with hypnotism. There are a lot of threats with hypnotism. So do know that. That's Shelley she just wrote, I've never read about hypnosis. Yes. There are many ways, and I am gonna probably work on that with the patrons at some point. Because I'd rather you do, like I said, I'd rather you do it self. Self is way better. Self is way, yes. So I just wanted to bring that up. That's the kind of experiences, and do think that he was young. I mean, he is like a young man right now. So of course he's willing to do all these, have all these different experiences. He didn't mind so much. We live in a different world now. We live in a much different world. So, you got Edgar, who is engaged to Gertrude, but living in a whole different city, hanging out with Margaret, while Gertrude is falling away in depression. You also have me go 100 years later, still engaged to Brad, which I guess I should have. We were still really engaged. We never took the engagement off the table. It was still there. Like, yeah, we just need 6 months separation, then we'll get married. It was very weird what we did. Still, kind of with Brad, hanging out with somebody else, all the while Brad is wasting away. By the Christmas of 1899. So think about it. In August of 1898 is when Edgar went to work in Louisville. So this is kind of like a year. This is like a year and a half. It's Christmas, not of that current year, the following Christmas. So it's kind of like a year and a half has passed since he's been home to Hopkinsville, since he's seen Gertrude. A year and a half. He goes home, and he has all these wonderful gifts for people that he brings with him. And while he is in town that Christmas season, his family gives him a good talk. Gertrude's family gives him a good talk of keeping your promise, quote unquote. He sees Gertrude. The ring that he had shipped off to get sized and fixed, he now has in his possession, and he was going to give it to her, and it didn't even fit her anymore. That's how much she wasted away. He could visibly see how his lack of communication, his lack of actually still holding fast to the commitment, everything was really she was dying away. She really was. So the family got involved. Like, do you see what you're doing to her? You young, wild man, having a good time up in Louisville, wasting all your money? Where's the down payment on a house? So what happened was her family, Gertrude's family, remember they're the family on the hill. They did have some money, right? Not to the extent of Margaret in Louisville, but still, in Hopkinsville, they were the elite family in Hopkinsville. Her family said, listen, you haven't even saved for a house. You haven't saved for anything. We don't know what the heck you're doing up there. We are offering, if you keep your promise to Gertrude, that you can stay in the cottage on one of our properties. You know what I mean? You can stay in this cottage when you first get married. And actually, they got married on that cottage. The story does end well. And his family said, yeah, you got mixed up with some stuff up there in Louisville. Even though you're doing all sorts of good, you're not doing good to the people that you care about here, your families. So his dad at the time, Leslie, right? Leslie, not the best man, as we can recall from all these bios. Leslie was now working as a insurance salesman. He was doing okay, actually. Because Leslie was kind of a con man. he had that sales spark, let's say. He was doing pretty well. So Leslie said, come work for me. Like, you have to get out of Louisville. Come work for me. During that Christmas trip, Cayce, Edgar, spent quality time with Gertrude. They spent New Year's Eve together. And he told her, I will keep my promise. Now, he did go back to Louisville and he had to work a few more months there. But he never spoke to Margaret again. He worked his job. He saved up some money. He went back to Hopkinsville, married Gertrude, and then went to work for his dad. So, and that's hence why we get a few years down the road, they're in Madisonville, quarantined with smallpox in this hotel. Once again, he's hypnotized. So, hear me out. This was going to be the main point to this story. And of course, Brad and I get married at the end. This is the main point. Edgar in 1941 had a dream. And in this dream, he's in what he called the Hall of Records. And the Hall of Records notifies him. You never know. Maybe he was thinking about it. He was, in his waking day, he was reminiscing about Margaret and what if I had married her, or maybe if I had married Margaret, I would have had enough money to create my center without even having to do all this other side stuff that will come further in his bio. Who knows what sponsored or created why this dream happened in the first place. But he had this dream and he recorded it in 1941. That he was in the Hall of Records, and the records informed him that if he had not married Gertrude, so if he had made a different decision, if he did not listen to both sides of the families, if he did not make it back home that Christmas, if he did not decide to marry Gertrude, Gertrude would have died, I have the dates. Gertrude would have died in 1906. Guys, this was the New Year's. This was the Christmas and New Year's of 1899, I believe. Or, yeah, like a year later. Year and a half later, right? So they brought in the new century together that New Year's Eve. They brought it in together. Now we're in 1900. The Hall of Records in 1941 told him that if he hadn't married Gertrude, she would have died of tuberculosis in 1906. It would have been 6 years later. And he would have died of some kind of horrible stomach issue in 1914. Just 14 years later. I'm bringing this up, okay? I'm bringing this up because he learned that in 1941. That would have been the outcome if you had chosen differently. This concept of destiny. I'll bring into my story, and then we're going to talk about destiny. Years later, years later, from the Akashic, I learned that that car accident my husband had, he was actually supposed to die. He was supposed to die. And if you had been there, you would have, if you had seen the pictures, if you had seen, his car rolled 5 times and then slammed into a big pole. He should have been dead. Yeah, but he somehow miraculously, absolutely nothing was wrong to him. Absolutely nothing happened to him physically. He will describe it as he knew at least 2 beings all of a sudden surrounded him, and angelic beings prevented him from dying. Okay? And that was when I went, okay, your stress is too much for you. I don't know if I should focus on my career. I'm still kind of young. This is moving way too fast. We need to separate for a moment. Whoa. Now, go years later, we're married. And I'm in the Akashic. And I don't know, I can't remember why I received this information, but it was very clear to me that they stated that my husband, if we had not have met, I mean, think about it, we had our first kiss in December. We met like at the beginning of December. And then we ended up at a Christmas party together, and we kind of went, yeah, I like you. I like you. And then we had a first kiss. And then by New Year's, we're talking about marriage. And then all this craziness ensued and his accident by November, the first week of November. I'm sorry, I keep saying November. Probably because it's November 1st. February, I'm sorry, February. So that was actually just 2 months. 2 months. From meeting, kissing, really engaged, accident. 2 months. Okay? The Akashic later on, as we've been married for years now, told me that that car accident was always in place. That car accident was always there in his story. The difference was, is if we hadn't met and fell so madly in love that fast, he would have died in that car accident. And as they told me this, I went, oh my goodness, then tell me what I would have, like, if he died, what would have happened to me? And they told me what would have happened to me. I actually would have never got married. I would have never got married. That would have devastated me so bad. I would have focused on my career and just kept hitting massive burnouts over time, continuously burning out. And then I would have left that career, and I would have still been participating in something along the lines of this, but definitely not who I am now. And I would have never been married. I would have been a single lady for the rest of my years. So when we talk about destiny, same with Gertrude and Edgar. She would have died 6 years later. He would have died 14 years later. Turn of the century, things happened. Tuberculosis happened. And she would have been too weak from the depression to handle tuberculosis. My husband, if we had not have met and committed so much to each other in a short time period, he would have been dead in that car accident, and I would have had such a vastly different life. A very, very different life. With that being said, this idea of destiny, there is not such a thing. Is there things in place, like markers, right? Like how I said my husband's car accident was going to happen regardless or not. The outcome to it, the symbolism around it, why, And the how, that was that was all determined by his decisions, his choices. Was it in place? Was there a marker? Yes. Was there a marker for Edgar to probably go to Louisville? Yep. There was a marker there for him to go to Louisville. All that other stuff, him hanging out with Margaret, doing this, doing that, those were his choices. Those were all his choices. So we have this weird concept of what destiny is. When it doesn't even really exist. We put these markers in our stories. We do, by the way. The creator is not over this. We are over this. Our higher selves are over what's going to happen in our stories. We put these markers, benchmarks, markers to create something, to lead us into decision making or pull us back from what we've done. Many times we refer to them as divine intervention. Like when I shattered my ankle all to hell, I know I put that in there, and that was what got me sober. That is what got me to stop doing what I was doing because I was not able to do it on my own. So at the time, I saw it as divine intervention. No, I had put that marker there for many reasons. It would have still been there, maybe not as severe as it was. It would have still been there regardless if I was sober or not sober. It was a very significant benchmark or marker to take me this way or that way or pull me back, reshape things. That is what quote unquote people call as destiny. It is not a day-to-day thing. And how those markers in our stories play out to the severity, to the outcomes of them, how they shape you, what you learn from them, what you gain from them, all of it, what you decide through them, that is what then continues the story on, continues your story on. So imagine if you are the author of your story, right? So every day you're making stuff up, you're writing stuff down, you're making decisions, you go to the store, you don't go to the store, whatever it may be, right? You're doing that. But let's say 5 days from now there's some kind of benchmark that you had already put in place. Okay, you're going to live through that. You're going to live through that. On the other side of that is what is still you now are writing. So I'm using my ankle as an example. I'm using it as an example as far as to drive this home, even more so than Edgar finding out both of them would have died just a few years afterwards if he did not decide to keep his commitment to her. Same as if Brad and I had not met and fell madly in love within 2 months, that car accident would have killed him. That was his story. It was an ending. It was a complete ending. And then I was informed in context of that during that, then I still was like, okay, we need to separate for a while. You need to heal, sort out. You just got divorced, that kind of thing. I need to figure out what I'm doing. I'm getting promoted again. During that time is when him and I separately, along with the higher conscious self, working with other higher conscious beings, started to rewrite the inner workings of our story. Because originally Brad should have been dead. So then it was like, oh, he's alive. Oh, this is changing things up. Okay, is Courtney just going to leave entirely still? Like, is she going to be single forever? No, it was at least months of not knowing which end is up. And we feel it here, we feel it there. We are always in creation. So, like, take my ankle for example. After I twisted my foot around 180 degrees, and of course needed surgery, and like I said, it really got me sober. I will tell you, a few days, about a week after the surgery, and I'm in the shower. I'm sitting actually on a garden chair, patio, plastic furniture in the shower because I couldn't stand, I couldn't walk, I couldn't, but I had to shower. And I climbed up in. I would, lift myself into it. Um, I started crying. I started crying desperately. Just looking at everything, looking at all the choices and decisions I had made. Desperately crying, just horror. I mean, it was very therapeutic, very therapeutic. Um, but I knew in that moment, eventually I would walk again. I mean, they told me I would walk again. So in that moment, I went, wow, Courtney, what are you going to do? Do you want to go back to the life that you've always lived? Drinking, drugging, horrible relationships, scared, fearful, angry, so much anger that you've always known. You've always known. So, in that is a lot of comfort. And that is so much comfort, right? I'm not one that likes surprises. So much comfort in that. Or this whole other direction of recovery and healing and coming to understand I do deserve a good life. Terrifying in that moment. It is that Robert Frost moment, that fork in the road. We all have those. Those are our markers. We do design that. That's the only thing that the word destiny could be attached to. And what we do and decide in that moment, or what we do and decide as we're living that experience, that determines how more of our story will play out. That it's what determines it. If, let's say, Brad and I still had met, but I heard that he was still married, and even though she's leaving for Texas in a couple of months, I still went, no, man, I don't want no drama. I don't want no drama. It was good. You're a great looking guy. Like you. You're kind of funny, but I got to move on. What if I had done that and we actually never connected? He would have died in the car accident. But because he was such a Rico Suave, I guess you could say, he was such a charmer, I started to fall for him. That's the difference. Did we meet? Yeah. Do you meet people all the time? Yeah. Do you dismiss them? Probably. Do you continue talking to them? Maybe. That is what makes the differences, the choices in the moment. So it's never what our past looks like. That's never a part of it. It is what we choose to do in the moment that lays out, quote unquote, destiny, which there really is no such thing. So I wanted to really try to explain that. I'm going to always have to keep explaining it because there's so much dialogue around destiny. And even on a collective scale. Collective scale, folks. Let's talk about that. Many people will think that, and I was one of these people, so I understand. When I was young and in college, everybody was protesting the war then, and I was like, why? history just repeats itself. I mean, I was that cynical, right? Not so. But there's a lot of people who are that cynical now that are saying, well, you can't fight the inevitable. You can't fight what's going to happen. I believe that things are marked in time and place that they will happen. Not necessarily so in the degree of its action. Remember, all things are in degrees. We learn this in Hermetics. Our vibrations, the vibrations of things, create what degree of things. A solid object has a different vibration than something of liquid, different degrees. Same with, quote unquote, the markers, even in the collective experience. The markers might still be there. What degree? Degree of the whole thing blows up? That's a degree. A degree of it's just a lot of shit talking back and forth? That's a degree. Right? So everybody does think that there's these benchmarkers. But they assume, because it's human condition to think of it in a massive negative way, when we're controlling the degree that it plays out. We really are. Remember, everything is in degrees. Your vibration, the rhythm, right? Rhythm of things, the rhythm of back and forth, the polarity, the creation, they're all in degrees. They're all. So that's something that people need to pay attention to. That we are creating the degrees within our own story and the collective. So are there things marked in place? Yep. Can they just be can we just blow them off? Yeah. They don't have to be as big and powerful. Can we lessen the degree? Yep. Yep, by the decisions and choices we make. So I hope that all made sense. We will be back for Edgar's bio again. Next week we'll probably be back in his book all about the different souls. We were talking about the different dimensions there. So thank you all for coming. It was good to see everybody. And stick with us in November. If any of you are interested in going deeper, join us in November on Patreon. I have no idea if that is the right link in the About section, but it starts with the morning light on Patreon. You'll see my face. In November, the 2 classes I teach there, and I do teach, I do quite more on Patreon than others. The 2 classes that I will be teaching on the 5th and the 19th will be free for the public to view. Along with, I'm going to re-record what the patrons have already gone through months and months and months ago, and new patrons can witness it or be a part of it, and so can old patrons. I'm going to re-record the Meet Your Higher Self class, and that will be free on Patreon for public viewing as well. So join us on Patreon so there can be more. It's more in-depth, broken down teaching there. It really is. November is going to be a little bit more meditation, but also teaching, so you can get an idea of what it's like there with everyone. So join us. November 5th and the 19th at 6 p.m. It will be live on Patreon. And then free for you to view. Consider joining us there and stay in touch, folks. I will be around. I hope you all are good. And thank you, Shelley, for telling me that it did make sense. Because we all have benchmarkers. We all have markers. It's what we do with them. Same as a collective, same as individual. We choose. So, I love you all dearly. Namaste.